Okay. Um, so, um, in addition to the naturally occurring species that we were expecting to find in these areas, we also found a number of exotic species and translocated species. So exotic species are animals that would have been brought in through the pet trade primarily that do not occur anywhere near um, the study region. So in this case, it's five different species that were found in Bloemfontein, and these are African fat-tailed gecko, California king snake, corn snake, Mexican black king snake, and the red-tailed boa. Unfortunately, several of these species are quite brightly colored, and so were killed up when they were found because the people who found them couldn't identify them and just assumed they were quite dangerous from the colors. Then we have another 8 or 9 species that are translocated. So these are species that were found um, elsewhere in South Africa, but not in the study area or not in certain parts of the study area, and were probably moved there by humans either on purpose or by accident. And this can happen, for example, if a family going from Gauteng to holiday in Cape Town takes some briarwood with them, and there's a gecko on the briarwood, and they get to Cape Town, the gecko jumps off, and then we have a translocated specimen. So here we observed angular tortoise, bronze gecko, boomslang, greater padloper, marbled reed frog, rhombic night adder, spotted bush snake, tropical house gecko, and the western Natal green snake. And I said 8 or 9 here because the greater padloper uh, does occur within the study region, but was found in Bloemfontein, where it is known to occur. However, it was found in a very heavily populated urban area, and so we suspect that that particular specimen might have been brought in by somebody who just found it elsewhere, which is a common problem with tortoises. Okay, um, overall, these are the most commonly reported species of the study region. And I'm using the phrase very carefully there, commonly reported and not abundant or just common, because this isn't an indication of abundance. It doesn't mean that you're most likely to find a puff adder out of all reptiles and amphibians in the Free State. There's definitely a bias for snakes being posted to Facebook, and one can imagine why. If you see a snake, you really want to know what that is. You want to know if it's venomous or not. Um, and so you're much more likely to post a picture of a snake to Facebook to ask for an identification than you are to post a picture of a lizard. So a lot of the most commonly reported species in the database are snakes, and lizards are in general quite underrepresented, which is unfortunate. So yeah, the top 6 species are puff adder, the wrinkles, mole snake, Cape cobra, brown house snake, and the common dwarf gecko. These are 3 highly venomous species, the puff adder, the wrinkles, the Cape cobra, and then the non-venomous mole snake, which can inflict a nasty bite, and the brown house snake, which is also non-venomous. And then our first lizard, the common dwarf gecko. Okay. Um, just to say thank you to all of the contributors. These are some of the top contributors to the Facebook group over the several years we've been active. Big thank you to Stefan for posting tons and tons of records all the time. And in addition to these, he also sends me a lot of records from other Facebook groups, which I then upload to the group as well, which aren't even in this count. So thank you, everyone. Also, a lot of colleagues on this list too from either UFS or the National Museum. Really do appreciate your involvement. For Bloemfontein itself, we have several new species for this period of time that we're reporting on. Unfortunately, most of them are exotic species or translocated species. First we have the boa constrictor, which is an exotic species, was probably brought in as a pet. Then we have the boomslang, angular tortoise, and bibronze gecko, which all three are probably translocated, not naturally occurring in Bloemfontein, but probably were brought there. And then the final two species, the Karoo girdled lizard and Peter's thread snake, are both naturally occurring, and we were quite excited to get our first records of these for Bloemfontein. Then for the rest of the study area, we had 5 new species. We had one translocated individual with species, which is the Western Natal green snake, found at Clarence. Then we had quite an exciting discovery of a Beats's tiger snake in Oranje, which is not in the study area, but is one of these adjacent areas very close to the border with the Free State. And I'm going to highlight that example just now. We also had a striped harlequin snake from Herzogsville. These are very uncommon species to find, so it's very exciting to have one of these. And a many-spotted snake, Amphibians multimaculatus, quite a shy snake from Sentinel. Also not pictured, we had our first Bibron stiletto snake, which was quite exciting. It's a highly venomous species from Deniseville. Then just to go back to that Beats's tiger snake, this was a really exciting thing to work on because the original post was made by a Mr. Gerard Burke on Facebook, asking for an identification of the snake that he found outside a gym and in Oranje. And that was quite exciting because there had, up to that point, not been any records from Oranje. It was quite far outside of the historical record range, although it was thought to be within the area in which the species occurred. So we did a bit of digging and found that this exactly the same snake, the same individual, had also been submitted to iNaturalist a few days later by a different person, Mr. Stian van Rensburg, and I contacted both observers, and Stian also supplied me with photographs of another specimen, a different snake, that he saw a few days later. So we have written this up as a short distribution note, which we hope will be published soon. Just a note on some scientific name changes over this reporting period. There's the spotted rock snake has changed from Lamprophis guttatus to Alopecia guttatum, and the tremolo sand frog has split into different species. The one that we have in the study region is now the southern tremolo sand frog, or Tomoptona adiostola. All right, so I'm going to go through some of the other Free State maps. We've already looked at the water monitor, so I'll skip that one, and we'll do the snakes. First up, we have the wrinkles. So this was previously the species we had the most records for. The dark blue records are literature records, and the pale blue records are Facebook and other social media records, with the pink diamonds indicating records from the study period. Then the inset map here shows the distribution of the species. So where each orange dot indicates a quarter degree in which the species has been cited, either historically or using confirmed social media records. And you can see that it's quite widely distributed across South Africa, mostly in the eastern parts and the south. And there's also a disjunct population in Zimbabwe. So what we're seeing in the Free State is sort of a mirror of this. We see it mostly in the east and central areas, and the Facebook and other social media records are adding quite a lot to understanding of this, filling up a lot of gaps between historical records, which is quite valuable. In fact, we were able to write this up in 2021 as a short paper in African Journal of Herpetology, which was quite exciting. So it doesn't fall into this reporting period, but still very happy about that. Next up, we have the puff adder. This is currently the species we have the most records for. Um, Again, the pale blue are Facebook records and social media records, whereas the dark blue are literature records, with pink indicating the new records for this period. And you can see that there's a lot of new records in Bloemfontein and Clarence, courtesy of the snake relocators who contribute a lot to the project. So thank you very much to them. Really getting a lot of very useful data from them, and it's meaning we can have very fine scale resolution, particularly in these areas. The distribution map, the inset map here shows the distribution for Southern Africa, so just kind of not showing beyond the border there. But you can see they occur kind of more or less all over, with some interesting exceptions. So we do have this large gap in the northern part of the province, where we don't have any historical or contemporary Facebook records. And that is a bit surprising. We think this might possibly be because this area is used a lot for farming and is quite cultivated. And so it might not be a very suitable habitat to sustain large numbers of puff adders, and that might be why we're not getting many records there. But this is something we are currently ongoing investigating. And I will talk about that again in just a few slides. One really exciting offshoot that we got from this project was Jade Hastings, another of the snake relocators from Bloemfontein and a student at UFS, found this puff adder that was very unusual. It's a speckled form that doesn't have the traditional chevrons of a typical puff adder, which you can see above here. So that was really unusual. It didn't match any of the known color morphs for the species. And so we were able to just put out a short research note on this very unusual observation with Jade, which was great. Then for puff adders, we are wanting to do a similar approach to what we did with the wrinkles, looking at the distribution and commenting on that in a paper. But we're also wanting to go a bit beyond what we did with the wrinkles. So to that end, we're trying to do some niche modeling or species distribution modeling to see if we can predict where the species is more likely to occur. So here we're using a program called MaxEnt, which uses only presence data to infer the probability of suitable habitat in an area through machine learning. So we give it a bunch of input variables. In this particular case, we give it the 19 bioclimatic variables, which are all to do with either temperature or precipitation. And then we also give it an elevation variable and something for the global human modification of terrestrial systems. So that is how much humans have modified a habitat and should show up if a habitat has been heavily modified, for example, by farming. So each of these different variables are used in conjunction with a set of localities where the species has been spotted to define a model. So we tested two different models. The first model was for just our study area, using only these Facebook records, social media records, and historical records. And then the second model was for the entire distribution of the puff adder, which is across most of Africa and Saudi Arabia. Sorry, sub-Saharan Africa, Saudi Arabia, and Morocco, using just iNaturalist records. And this was to kind of validate our approach using an independent data set that had very good quality locality data. And then these models are assessed using a criterion called the area under the curve score, where we want a value as close to 1 as possible. Anything above 0.7 is generally considered good. So we want between 0.7 and 1. So this is the first model for the study area using our Facebook records primarily, but also historical records. Each gold point with a black outline is a locality where the specimen has been found, using either photographic or videographic evidence from the Facebook group or from historical records, um, or other social media records. And these have been filtered so that they don't occur within 10 kilometers of another record. As the green dots indicate other records that were in this data set, but occurred within 10 kilometers of another record, and so were filtered out. Then the rest of this is a heat map, where the warmer colors towards the cream color indicates a very high probability of a habitat that favors the puff adder, whereas the very dark colors indicate a very low probability of habitat that the puff adder would inhabit. So overall, across most of the study region, we have very, very pale colors, indicating that there is a high probability of suitable habitat across much of the study region, with some exceptions. So we have some dark purple bruising around Bultfontein and Boerteville. And then we have extremely low probability of suitable habitat in the eastern and southern regions of Lesotho, interspersed by this branching pattern, which looks very, very cool. The branching pattern are the river valleys in Lesotho. So what this means is that in the river valleys, there seems to be suitable habitat for the puff adder, but as you go up to high elevations in these mountainous areas, you quickly end up in habitat which is very low probability of being suitable for puff adders. So very unlikely to find them, presumably, and that kind of fits with what we know about the species. So that was quite exciting to see. We also had an associated AUC score of 0.758, which is pretty good. Then this is the second model for the entire distribution. And the blue dots here are iNaturalist records. So we don't use any of our Facebook records here. You can see that there's a huge number of iNaturalist records across the distribution. This is over 1,000 records, which is great. And again, we filtered them so that we don't allow for any records that occur within 10 kilometers of another record. Same approach as before. So in the inset, we have the study region, with the gold dots being the records that were used from the analysis. And there's some blue dots, particularly on Bloemfontein, which were filtered out. And we see a very similar pattern for the study region, where much of it is these pale colors indicating a very high probability of suitable habitat, with exceptions around Bultfontein and eastern and southern Lesotho, punctuated again by these river valleys. As we go north of South Africa, though, we start getting darker and darker colors very, very quickly. And most of this is probably a bit of an artifact because our naturalist records are biased somewhat towards Southern Africa. So there's a huge number of records in Southern Africa, which lets the model predict very nicely the different kinds of habitat, both the comparative sparse sampling further north into Africa. This becomes more problematic, and the model thinks that there's far lower chance of having suitable habitat in those areas, which is not necessarily the case. This is just undersampling of those areas. Despite this, we do have, lighter shades coming up, particularly as we go up towards the Horn of Africa, across into Saudi Arabia, which is what one would expect, and in the top left for Morocco. If we compare this to the distributions, this is the currently understood distribution from the IUCN red list. We see this is generally a fairly good fit, although obviously we would want the bits just south of the Sahara to be a bit brighter, because we do know that they do occur there. And our map is quite dark there, presumably just from the undersampling. And this model also had a very high AUC score. I think it was previous slide, yeah, 0.929. So it's quite a good model. Okay. The next species is the Cape cobra. Contrary to the wrinkles, This species is found on the western side of Africa, uh, well, of Southern Africa, and the western side of the Free State. So here, what was quite interesting is that um, previously there were no records historically from the kind of central northern bit around Welkom, further up north, and even approaching Paris. We have all this area filled in now with social media records from Facebook, which is quite exciting that this could potentially indicate a possible range expansion. We would obviously want to examine this with the species distribution modeling approach that we just showcased with the puff adder, um, to be able to get a better idea if this is actually happening or not. Okay, then the South African slug eater. This species is non-venomous. It's the first of these species we've done for the Free State maps that is non-venomous. It just eats slugs and snails. Um, it's unfortunately not very well represented by historical records. And we also don't have a lot of records from the Facebook group, but we are getting quite a few, and they're quite useful for filling in the distribution. So it's a bit early days for this map in particular, as we don't have as many records as for the other species. But we can see there's a lot of areas in the northern regions of the map which are being filled up by these Facebook records, which is very, very cool. This is one that we're hoping to expand further. Okay. Next, I'm going to speak about some Bloemfontein-specific maps, and here we're looking at a single city which is incredibly well sampled compared to the rest of the study region. So it's kind of affording us a look into what we could possibly get from the rest of the study region if we had really good sampling throughout. And it's just a very useful way to look at what the data is capable of. So again, just looking at some of the most commonly reported species, and again, hazarding that commonly reported is not the same as relative abundance. Here we have the common dwarf gecko as the most commonly reported species, followed by puff adder, brown house snake, Cape cobra, common egg eater, and then mole snake. So all of these are very similar to the previous across the entire study area. But we do have the common egg eater as something new, which is quite exciting. It's another non-venomous snake. On this slide, I've just have photos of all of the species that we have done Bloemfontein-specific maps of, and I've ranked them in order of how many records we actually have for each of them. So we have the common dwarf gecko in the top left, then the puff adder below it, brown house snake, Cape cobra, and the common egg eater, the mole snake, the leopard tortoise, eastern Cape dwarf chameleon, the Cape gecko, wrinkles, raucous toad, giant bullfrog, the striped grass snake, aurora house snake, speckled rock skink, Cape wolf snake, common caco, the southern rockagama, the thin-tailed legless skink, fork-marked sand snake, spotted grass snake, common platana, and the bubbling cassina. So we're going to go through these maps just now. So first, we're going to have a look at the snakes of Bloemfontein. Currently, we have 11 species with suburb-level maps, and we have data for 20 species in total for the city. We'd expect there to be about 22 species in this area, though. So currently, we're missing observations for Biberon stiletto snake and the striped harlequin snake. So I'm just going to introduce us to the first map, and then I'll ask Mike to take over with describing these. So this is the map for the brown house snake. This is for the city of Bloemfontein. So we have indicated each of the different suburbs or small holdings if they have indication of presence. So if a suburb has had a record of a brown house snake, then it is colored in, and the color depicts when this record was received. So if it's a yellow observation, that means it's any time in the last 3 years that the group has been operational. And then if it's orange, then it is a new suburb that has only been added within the last year and a few months, so during the reporting period. Yeah, I think that's it from me. Mike, would you like to take over?
Okay, thanks, Cora. So this is a map of the brown house snake, a very common and often abundant species in many cities. As you can see, it's pretty much distributed almost throughout the city. We lack some records, and this applies to some of the other maps as well. We lack records for the area of Bloemfontein in the southeast, which is the traditional township area, Mangaung. It's quite a high, quite a densely, the buildings are pretty close together, and there's a high population there. So for many species, we are actually concerned we might not get records, but this is changing with time. The brown house snake probably does occur there. We just don't have records now. But brown house snakes are pretty much commensal with man. They live in the same areas because they look for mice and rats and lizards to eat, which are often around human habitation. So yeah, this is one of the most widely distributed snakes in Bloem, suburbs and in the town area. So if we look at the next map, Cora, we can, yeah. Okay, the puff adder. Now, if you look at the distribution of the puff adder, you'll see that most of the records are on the outskirts of the city, and that's for obvious reasons. Puff adders are only likely to be found in natural grassland, even if it's a small piece, and the grass doesn't have to be very long or dense either. But basically, they're found on the edges of the city. And at the moment, again, we lack records in the south. But I think there should be record. Puff adders should be there. We'll probably get more records in time. But yeah, so that's the puff adder. We can move on. So Cape Cobra, the records we have are mostly in the west, and you'll see in the orange, those are the records new to the last period of investigation. Still, most of the records are in the west. There are few elsewhere. We thought at one stage that Cape Cobras would be in the west of the city to a large extent, and Rinkels in the east, which is partially true. We'll come to that later. But Cape Cobras are also, to a large extent, going to be found on the edges of the city where there's natural grassland. But they do move around a lot and will be found within some of the suburbs like Park West, Dan Pienaar, Langeneven Park. There are a lot of them in Langeneven Park and areas around there. So I can move on. Common egg eater. We would have imagined that there would be a lot more records for this very common snake, but it may be slightly limited because of its food. It eats only bird eggs, and obviously there are a lot of birds nesting in trees, especially in the suburbs. Now, the suburbs, if you look at this map, the older suburbs with more established big gardens and lots of trees and so on are the ones pretty much in the west. And the areas in the southeast of Bloemfontein are perhaps less suitable for something like an egg eater. But bear in mind that they actually also eat the eggs of ground nesting birds and birds that make their nests in small bushes or even grass plants. So it's kind of strange we haven't got more records for this yet. We can move on. Rinkels. Most of our records are in the east of Bloemfontein, few records elsewhere. We can move on. Right, so this is an interesting map. It shows the distribution, the known records that we have of Cape Cobras, shown in the yellow, and rinkels in the black. And the areas that are purple show areas where they kind of overlap. Now, it's interesting that the Cape Cobra will pretty much eat anything that comes its way. It will eat rinkels, it'll eat puff adders. So just kind of interesting that we have this kind of separation, but we don't really know whether it means too much yet, except that these are two very big and obvious snakes. Most people know them well, and we really would have expected to have got a lot more Cape Cobra records on the other side and vice versa. So yeah, we'll see how it goes in the future, but this is what we have so far. The mole snake is also a snake, also a constrictor like the brown house snake, also eats mostly rodents and some lizards. So we do expect it'll turn up pretty much throughout the city, but not too many records yet. Striped grass snake. So these seem to occur pretty much all over the place. We don't have many records, but it looks like they'll be all over Bloem. We have not had too many new records for this, but again, this is a snake that's very sort of nervous and fast moving and will require expanses of grassland. You're not really going to get them settling in people's gardens and living around there. They need grassland. So they will be more in the on the edges of the city and in the small holdings, which is what you can see on the map at the moment. Fork-marked sand snake. Yeah, so far the records are mostly in the west. This is also similar to the grass snakes, also a very fast-moving kind of nervous snake. It will also require areas of natural felt, so we wouldn't be expecting this to occur much towards the center of the city. Cape wolf snake. We're not really sure why we only have these records in the west, why we don't have some more. And I think in time we probably will. There's no reason why they shouldn't occur, around the edges of the entire city. We wouldn't expect them too much in the middle of Bloemfontein, but they, like many other snakes, they often take up residence in old termite heaps, and plenty of those around the city. But yeah, those are the only records we've got. And this is an interesting case, though, because compared to many of the other species, the Cape wolf snake, we actually have had most of the records in this last reporting period. Aurora house snake, it's more it's a lot less common than the brown house snake, for example. So we didn't expect to get too many records, but again, no real reason to suspect it doesn't occur more widely in Bloemfontein. Spotted grass snake. So you'll remember the striped grass snake I mentioned probably occurs throughout the city, and the spotted grass snake, we have very few records for it, mostly in the north, I guess. But I would be quite interested to see in time if we get more records for this, because in other parts of the Free State, they kind of divide in two, with the striped being in the west and the spotted in the east. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in Bloemfontein.
All right, thank you, Mike. I'm just going to introduce the next section. So we have 6 species maps at the suburb level for lizards, and we have observations for 13 species. In total, we'd expect about 17 species in this area. The outstanding species are the eastern ground agama, Holub's sandfold lizard, the speckled sand skink, and spotted sand lizard. Although all 4 of these are probably only found right on the outskirts of the city, in much of the wilderness. So they'd be quite uncommon, and we probably won't be seeing these anytime soon.
Okay, the common dwarf gecko, which Cora mentioned earlier on, this is a little gecko that never occurred in Bloemfontein. We saw it here for the first time in around about the mid 1980s. It does not occur naturally in Bloemfontein, and if many people thought it unlikely it would survive through the cold winters here, but it's managed to establish itself very well. It's now by far the most common lizard in Bloemfontein. You see them all over the place. They have really spread all over now. There's some areas you can just walk down the road and you'll see them on almost every wall. And they are very widely distributed in the older suburbs, as you can see here. It's kind of in the west. But interestingly, recently, and this was in the last reporting period, we've managed to get a number of records from the southeastern area, Mangaung in general. So yeah, these things are being brought in from different areas. They hop into people's cars and then hop out again, and sometimes they grab it, perhaps they meet up, but certainly this is a very established species now. By far the most common species and widespread species in Bloemfontein. Speckled rock skink. Now, this lizard is very common in places like Pretoria and Johannesburg. You see them almost everyone has them in their gardens and on their walls, rockeries and so on. But for some reason in Bloem, they're not quite that common in gardens. We did the last time we had a webinar, we had no records really in the West, but during this last period, we have picked up a few. So it looks like they are pretty widely distributed in Bloemfontein, but certainly they're not at all as common as they are in places like Johannesburg and Pretoria. So it'll be interesting to see the next time we have a webinar to see if we've got even more records of these. Cape gecko, this is a very common gecko. It's a very common gecko throughout South Africa, for that matter. And they're probably all over the place in Bloem. People sometimes just don't see them. They're nocturnal. And I mean, I only saw them at my townhouse after, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. So yeah, I think they're very widely distributed in the city. They take up residence in roofs and rockeries and all over the place. So, okay, move on. Eastern Cape dwarf chameleon. These have really become established in Bloemfontein now. Again, mostly in the more established suburban areas where there are lots of trees and so on. It's not too surprising that this chameleon can survive in a place like Bloemfontein. They occur naturally throughout the Karoo. Gets pretty cold there at night. They also occur naturally as far north as Zastron. So yeah, Bradypodium ventrale is what we think it is, and I suspect that they are actually breeding and they've become naturalized in Bloemfontein now. People sometimes find them falling off trees, but yeah, they're quite common now. Southern Rockagama. So this is a lizard that you're less likely to find just in anyone's garden because it seems to require natural rocky areas. So you'll find them in places like Naval Hill and in some of the small holding areas, especially where there are rocky outcrops. So yeah, we expect it to be quite common around Bloem, but not so much inside, except in 1 or 2 places where there are relic patches of rocks. Thin-tailed legless skink. These are, most of the records are in the north. We've only had one recent new record. This lizard is not often seen. It's you kind of have to search for them under leaf litter. So they might be a bit more common than it seems, but yeah, I suspect that they are not going to be found all over the place in Bloemfontein, more on the outskirts.
All right. Then for the tortoises of Bloemfontein, we only have one species that has a suburb map. We do have data for three species in total, and we were expecting 3 species. So we do have information for everything. However, as I alluded to at the beginning of the talk, the one species the greater putloper is, although it is found in this area, the only record that we have of it is of a specimen that has probably been translocated. So we would want more records of this in natural habitat, ideally.
So the leopard tortoise is well known to most people, and it's pretty well known in Bloemfontein. It does kind of just extend into Bloemfontein in terms of its natural range, but it's most likely that the majority of leopard tortoises that you find in Bloemfontein are either escaped pets or the result of escaped pets being released in places like Naval Hill. We're kind of surprised though that we haven't had more records because it is a very common animal. Of course, one of the restrictive factors would be the fact that they can't really move around freely from house to house and over roads and so on. So that might explain why most of the records are kind of on the outskirts of the city again.
Okay, and the final section for these maps are the frogs. We have suburb maps for 5 species. We have observations for a total of 7 species, and we would have expected 10 species in the area. So we are missing observations for 3 species, the Lalandes river frog, the snoring paddle frog, and the southern pygmy toad. The latter two of these, snoring paddle frog and the southern pygmy toad, are again 2 species that probably only occur right on the periphery in the wilderness, and therefore they're going to be quite difficult to obtain observations of.
Right. So the giant bullfrog, um, it's a very common frog as long as it has some natural grassland, naturally a flooded grassland in which to breed, or ponds where it can breed. So there are several areas in and around Bloemfontein where they do breed. We're bound to find a lot more, and I suspect they're pretty much all over Bloem, except in the very built-up areas. Raucous toad is a very common frog. Again, it looks like the records are clustered well, they are clustered largely in the north, but it's a species that we would expect common throughout Bloemfontein. They might also be to a certain extent restricted by breeding habitat, which they need ponds in which to breed and so on. But I think they're a lot more common in than the map shows. Common caco, very small little frog, more commonly heard than seen, I guess. They do move away from once they've metamorphosed, they move away from rivers in very large numbers, if you're lucky enough to see them. So they are likely to be all around Bloemfontein, certainly, not towards the center of the city because they do need breeding habitat. Okay, can move on. Bubbling casino is a bit like the Cacosternum. It's also more often heard than seen, really. They're very common on Naval Hill, for example. And I think they will also be quite common around the city, but restricted within because of breeding habitat. Common plot, Anna, we really expected more records of these. Obviously, they will be around. They're probably all around and in even throughout Bloemfontein, really. But because they are aquatic, pretty much fully aquatic, unless there are ponds or rivers or drainage areas, you're not really going to see them. And people might well have them in their ponds or in rivers on their properties, but that they don't know of. So, yeah, this map is definitely not showing their true range.
All right, thank you, Mike. So we are, as I mentioned earlier, always adding to our maps. We are focusing on the Free State maps and trying to publish those results. We've already done the Wrinkles map. and we're currently doing the PubAdder publication, which I showed you a teaser of today with the species distribution modeling. Once we've done the PubAdder, we will set our sights on one of the other species for writing up as a publication, possibly Cape Cobra. And at the same time, we're also going to be adding more of our Bloemfontein suburb level maps for the other species that we have data for. So that is going to be quite exciting, with the goal of trying to publish something with all of the Bloemfontein maps together, um, probably around the, what did you say, the 5-year mark? Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so hopefully get all of those together and have enough data to add them all together for a publication at that point, which would be a nice anniversary for the group, I think. Then earlier I said that we had a certain number of observations for both the Free State and Bloemfontein. Just to put that into perspective for what we were expecting, in the Free State we have 71 reptiles observed out of a total of 93 that we were expecting, and 18 amphibians of a total of 29. So it puts us at just over 75%, which is looking pretty good. And then in Bloemfontein, it's even better. We are at 36 of 42 reptiles and 7 of 10 amphibians. So a little better than 75%. And we're hoping to keep closing that gap. Then if you were paying attention to the numbers there, you will have noticed that we're missing observations for 33 species. They are listed here. It's 1 tortoise, 18 lizards, 3 snakes, and 11 frogs. So again, we can see definitely a bias towards snake sampling in our database, which is to be expected given the nature of Facebook. But still, we really would appreciate getting, especially these lizards, represented quite well. Yeah, and so this is something we'll be looking forward to add to in the future. And if you do have any observations of a reptile amphibian, even the most common one, it doesn't have to be these hard to find ones. Please do post it to the group. We really can always use any data. Okay, thank you very much for attending this evening's talk. I'm going to open this up to questions now. And once again, apologies for the slow start and the issues with the meeting ID. Um, yeah, really unfortunate series of events. But thank you for still being here and listening to our talk. Are there any questions?
Hi, Cora.
Hi, who's
It's
that?
Warren.
Hi, Warren. Great
How
to
you
hear from
doing?
you. Good, thanks.
Yeah,
How are
good,
you?
thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to say awesome work. I think this kind of data, if it's continued for the next decade or two, is going to provide absolutely groundbreaking insights into range expansion and contraction, and more specifically, where things occur today and, where they appear to be disappearing. And this sort of intensive look into the distributions around Bloemfontein is absolutely brilliant. If I look at the data coming from Gauteng and Limpopo, there's a couple of snakes that even in iNaturalist or GBIF, we're just not seeing any of those. One example is the fork-marked grass snake, what was Trinosaurus, now Laytoni.
Mhm.
There's just no records of those. Now, whether or not that's just because we're not seeing them or if they have actually just vanished would be an interesting question. So congratulations.
No, thank you very much, Warren. That sounds like almost a similar situation to this Parfada quandary we're looking at. And I really would like to know if this species distribution modeling is going to get us closer to an answer uh, of that nature, whether something does just disappear, if we can pick that up using this kind of machine learning approach. Um, yeah, but I've definitely not looked at the forkmark um, sand snake yet, or Laytoni for that matter. Um, thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Hi, Cora. It's Johannes here.
Hi, Johannes.
I just want to find out about those common girdled lizards that you've been studying.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if you've got any news about that.
Well, yeah, so I presented on the common girdled lizards at the HAA conference in January, and we're still working on the project. I'm actually leaving on Monday for another lab trip to go and work on them again. So it is something we are still pursuing. Um, is there anything in particular you'd like to know?
Um, well, I'm sort of interested in how many species you think there might be,
Cool.
or
Yeah,
yeah.
so at the conference, I presented some results indicating that it looks like we have 4 different populations, and we hadn't quite nailed down yet whether that is at the species level or not. The problem was that we're missing a bit of data for one of the genes. And that is actually why I'm doing this last trip now, because that was kind of offsetting our bootstraps and some of our certainty in what degree we were actually separating these groups. So I can't say with great certainty yet, but I can say that we definitely have 4 or more splits into different populations. And at least the major split does appear to be very, very deep. So we would expect there to be, I would think, between 2 and 4 species. And I would want to answer that question again, look back at this answer in a few months' time, because I think I'd be able to give you a lot better, a lot more detail.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cora.
Thanks, Johannes. Are there any other questions? All right, then I think we'll end the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I do hugely appreciate it. Once again, apologies for all the technical issues. But yeah, it's been great being able to speak about this project and just to be involved with it over the last few years. It's been a really surprising and rewarding project. I hope to see you next year. We'll probably be doing the next webinar about this time of year again, but we will keep everyone updated via social media. Thanks, everyone, and have a good night.
Thanks. Cheers.